The scent of blooming jasmine and fresh asphalt greeted me on my first day in Silverwood Terrace. Moving to the suburbs was supposed to be a retreat, a quiet sanctuary away from the relentless grind of the city. I envisioned lazy Sunday mornings, the distant hum of lawnmowers, and friendly neighbors waving across pristine driveways. Instead, I walked straight into a petty, manicured dictatorship ruled by a man who treated our homeowners association like his own personal fiefdom. His name was Valerius. He was a man who genuinely enjoyed the smell of his own authority, usually wearing a pastel polo shirt tucked too tightly into khaki shorts, armed with a clipboard and a laser measuring tape. Valerius was the worst breed of leader, intoxicated by microscopic power but completely allergic to accountability. He ruled Silverwood with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet golf glove, enforcing absurd mandates. Leave your trash bins at the curb a minute past 9 in the morning. That was a $200 citation. Plant the wrong shade of begonia. Expect a passive-aggressive summons taped to your front door. Yet his own property was a chaotic sanctuary of hypocrisy, featuring unpermitted deck extensions and a privacy fence that clearly violated municipal height ordinances. I tried the diplomatic route first. A week after moving in, I received a $500 fine because the stain I used on my backyard fence was chestnut instead of the board-approved walnut. The hardware store had been out of walnut for months due to a supply chain issue. I drafted a polite email, attached my receipts, cited the supply shortage, and approached him after a community block party asking for simple leniency. Valerius took a slow sip of his sparkling water, his lips curling into a smug, condescending smile. "Rules are the mortar of civilization," he drawled, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "If we let one fence slide, we'll be living in a slum by Christmas. Pay the fine or we put a lien on your house." He turned his back and walked away. I stood there gripping my plastic cup until it cracked. That was the exact moment I decided I wasn't just going to fight him. I was going to dismantle him, methodically, legally, and I wouldn't do it alone. My neighbor to the left was a woman named Kalia. She was a residential architect with striking auburn hair, a wickedly sharp tongue, and a garden that belonged in a magazine. Our paths crossed the very next afternoon. I found her kneeling in her front yard, aggressively hacking at a beautiful trellis of heirloom roses with pruning shears, muttering curses under her breath. Valerius had deemed her trellis an unauthorized vertical structure. I leaned against the property line, offering her a cold beer. She looked up, wiping dirt from her cheek, her green eyes flashing with residual annoyance before softening into a grateful smile. We sat on my porch as the sun dipped below the tree line, trading stories of Valerius's tyranny. The air between us crackled with an unexpected, easy chemistry. By our third beer, the conversation shifted from mere complaints to a mutual declaration of war. Kalia was brilliant, observant, and just as vindictive as I was feeling. We formed a quiet alliance, a partnership that would quickly blur the lines between co-conspirators and something far deeper. Step 1 of our operation required infiltration. Valerius's fatal flaw was his staggering arrogance. He chronically underestimated anyone who didn't play golf at his club. At the next HOA meeting, I volunteered for a vacant seat on the board, painting myself as an eager, naive newcomer desperate to foster community spirit. Valerius ate it up. He loved a sycophant. For 2 grueling years, I sat through bi-weekly meetings in the stuffy, fluorescent-lit back room of the community center. I played the quiet observer, nodding along as Valerius bullied the other spineless board members, burying them under avalanches of selectively enforced bylaws. I watched him push through opaque votes when dissenting homeowners were absent, conveniently misplacing architectural requests from anyone who had ever challenged him. I kept my head down, absorbed his tactics, and took meticulous notes. And after every suffocating meeting, I would walk across the lawn to Kalia's house. Those late-night debriefings became the highlight of my week. We would sit at her sprawling oak dining table, the soft glow of a pendant light illuminating the architectural blueprints she'd pushed aside to make room for my illegible notes. She would pour 2 glasses of a dark, peppery Syrah, and we would dissect Valerius's every move. We laughed, we strategized, and somewhere between deciphering the HOA's draconian paint codes and sharing midnight takeout, I realized I was falling in love with her. The brush of our hands over scattered papers, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, it all fueled my drive to win this war, if only to see her smile without the shadow of Valerius's tyranny hanging over her home. Then we discovered his second, infinitely more dangerous mistake. Valerius wasn't just a suburban dictator, he was a thief. He constantly bragged about his fiscal conservatism, parading the HOA's ledger like a holy text he alone could interpret. But the math was entirely fictional. Our monthly dues were exorbitant, nearly double the rate of adjacent, far more luxurious neighborhoods, yet Silverwood Terrace was crumbling. The community pool was padlocked for half the summer due to mysterious pump failures, and the common green spaces were turning into brittle, weed-choked wastelands. I began my probe gently. During a board meeting, I asked to review the quarterly budget, framing it as a desire to learn the ropes. Valerius chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Don't trouble yourself with the spreadsheets. I've got the numbers locked down. When I filed a formal, legally binding request for the financial records, weeks bled into a month with zero response. Kalia and I shifted our tactics. We started talking to the neighborhood, organizing quiet, informal gatherings under the guise of backyard barbecues. The whispers were deafening. Dozens of residents had demanded financial transparency over the years, only to be stonewalled. One neighbor, a retired accountant, noted that Valerius had recently installed a massive imported stone patio at his house, right around the time the HOA's emergency reserve fund was supposedly depleted. Another swore they'd seen Valerius's teenage sons hosting a private party at the community pool during one of its mandatory maintenance closures. Armed with these sworn suspicions, I bypassed Valerius entirely and filed a formal grievance with the state's housing authority, simultaneously submitting a binding demand to the HOA's external legal counsel. The threat of a state audit finally forced Valerius's hand. He dumped 3 heavy cardboard banker's boxes on my porch one rainy Tuesday evening, glaring at me through the drizzle. "Here's your precious paperwork," he spat. "Hope you enjoy the readings." I carried the damp boxes into Kalia's living room. We ordered a massive pepperoni pizza, brewed an entire pot of espresso, and dove into the chaos. Valerius had deliberately scrambled the documents. It was a labyrinth of missing invoices, duplicate receipts for trivial items, and staggering, inexplicable withdrawals. But he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. Kalia, with her architect's eye for structural anomalies, spotted the pattern first. "Look at this," she murmured, her shoulder pressing warmly against mine as she slid a bank statement over a pile of crusts. "There's a $15,000 recurring charge every quarter to a company called Verdant Horizons for common area landscaping. But the grass at the entrance is dead. I drove by the registered address for Verdant Horizons yesterday. It's a vacant lot behind a strip mall." We dug deeper, cross-referencing the HOA's outgoing wire transfers with public business registries. We found the smoking gun at 3 in the morning. Verdant Horizons was an LLC registered to a man named Ignatius, a notoriously shady local contractor. Ignatius was also the sole vendor for every inflated repair bill the HOA had paid over the last 5 years. More damningly, we found a secondary, unlisted bank account tied to the HOA, an account Valerius had sole signatory power over. He was inflating Ignatius's invoices, paying them out of the HOA's primary fund, and Ignatius was kicking back 40% of the profits directly into Valerius's hidden account. The sheer audacity of it left us breathless. I looked up from the glowing laptop screen, meeting Kalia's eyes. The exhaustion of the night vanished, replaced by a surging electric triumph. Without overthinking it, I leaned in and kissed her. She responded instantly, her hands tangling in my hair, pulling me closer amidst the sea of highlighters, bank statements, and cold pizza. It was the taste of victory, of shared secrets, and the promise of a future we were about to reclaim. Step 4 was the coup. We spent the next 3 weeks building a flawless, irrefutable dossier. I compiled spreadsheets, flowcharts, photographs of the neglected common areas, and printed copies of the LLC registries linking Valerius to Ignatius. Kalia took charge of the ground game, knocking on doors, speaking to neighbors in hushed tones, revealing just enough of our findings to ignite their fury. The annual HOA meeting was historically a desolate affair, attended only by Valerius and 2 elderly residents who came for the free cookies. But on the night of our strike, the gymnasium of the community center was packed to the fire code limit. Over 200 angry, whispering homeowners sat in the folding chairs. Valerius looked visibly unnerved when he stepped to the podium, adjusting his pastel collar, sweat beading on his forehead. He tapped the microphone, launching into his standard droning monologue about his tireless sacrifices for our community and the difficult financial climate necessitating another hike in our monthly dues. I stood up from the front row. The room fell dead silent. "Valerius, I'm going to have to stop you there," I said, my voice echoing off the cinderblock walls. "Could you clarify the $15,000 we paid last month to an empty lot behind the interstate? Or perhaps explain why the emergency fund was routed into an account solely under your name?" Valerius turned the color of wet ash. I don't think this is the time or the proper forum for baseless accusations." "Actually," Kalia said, standing up beside me, her voice ringing with absolute authority, "it is the exact time." On cue, 5 of our trusted neighbors began passing out thick, bound folders to every row. The dossiers. The room erupted into a symphony of rustling paper, followed immediately by gasps, angry murmurs, and outright shouting. People were reading the bank statements, seeing the inflated numbers, realizing they had been personally robbed to fund the dictator's lavish lifestyle. Valerius gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles white, shouting over the din about order and respect. But the illusion was shattered. I calmly walked to the front, turned to the crowd, and initiated a formal motion for an emergency vote of no confidence. It was seconded by 50 voices at once. Within 10 minutes, Valerius was unanimously stripped of his presidency, his board seat, and his dignity. He fled out the side door of the gymnasium to a chorus of jeers. The final blow was swift and merciless. The very next morning, the newly elected board, with Kalia as our new, reluctant but brilliant president, hired an independent forensic auditor. They didn't just confirm our findings. They uncovered even more. Valerius had embezzled nearly $65,000 and mismanaged tens of thousands more. We handed the auditor's certified report directly to the county prosecutor. Valerius was arrested on multiple counts of fraud and grand theft. Ignatius, his contractor accomplice, was slapped with a massive fine and permanently stripped of his business license. Facing crushing legal fees and court-ordered restitution to the HOA, Valerius was forced to sell his house, at a steep loss, just to stay out of state prison. The day the moving truck arrived at his property, Kalia and I sat on my porch, sipping Syrah, watching the movers carry away his custom patio furniture. He didn't look our way once. With the tyrant exiled, Silverwood Terrace finally became the sanctuary I had dreamed of. We reformed the HOA entirely, implementing strict term limits, requiring dual signatures on every financial transaction, and creating a transparent digital portal where every receipt was visible to every homeowner. The community pool was repaired and opened on time. The dead grass was replaced by lush, native gardens designed by Kalia herself. Our dues were slashed by 40%. Every evening, Kalia and I take a walk through the neighborhood. We pass Valerius's old house, now occupied by a young couple with a golden retriever, and I can't help but smile. Valerius tried to flee to a gated community 2 towns over, reportedly attempting to run for their HOA board before his boxes were even unpacked. He was laughed out of the clubhouse when a resident simply typed his name into a search engine. Justice in the suburbs isn't just served. It is audited, legally binding, and deeply, undeniably sweet. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't on grand stages, but in the quiet streets of our own neighborhoods. Standing up to a bully, no matter how small their kingdom, requires patience, strategy, and the courage to demand the truth. And if you're lucky, fighting for what's right might just lead you to the person you were meant to fight alongside. If you enjoyed this story of suburban justice and unexpected romance, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments below. What's the craziest HOA rule you've ever had to deal with? Until next time, keep your records close and your allies closer.